The auctioneer's voice echoed through the harbor warehouse like a funeral dirge, each word another nail in the coffin of hope. Ladies and gentlemen, our final lot of the day, the SS Meridian Star, a 1,958 luxury cruise liner, currently resting on the harbor bottom in 40 feet of water. Salvage rights only. Starting bid, $1. Laughter rippled through the crowd of serious buyers in their pressed suits and polished shoes. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Behind them, pressed against the cold metal wall, Elena Rodriguez clutched her 6-year-old daughter Sofia's hand and felt the weight of every mistake that had led them here. 3 hours ago, her sister-in-law had changed the locks on the apartment they'd been sharing. The apartment Elena had helped pay for during the 2 years since Marco died. "You're a burden," Rosa had said through the chain-locked door. "Marco's gone. You need to figure out your own life." Now Elena stood in a salvage auction with $87 in her pocket, a duffel bag of clothes at her feet, and a daughter who kept asking when they could go home. There was no home. Not anymore. "Do I hear $1? The auctioneer scanned the room with weary eyes. It was 6 p.m. on a Friday, and everyone wanted to leave. $1 for salvage rights to a sunken cruise ship? More laughter. Elena watched the wealthy bidders check their watches, gather their briefcases. To them, this was entertainment. The absurdity of trying to auction something worthless. A 500-foot cruise ship that had been listing in the harbor for 3 years before finally settling on the bottom 6 months ago. The owner had vanished. The insurance had lapsed. The city wanted it gone, but removing a sunken ship cost millions. Sofia tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Elena's stomach twisted. They'd shared a gas station sandwich for lunch. Dinner would have to wait. She needed every dollar for a motel room tonight, though $87 wouldn't get them much beyond a roach-infested dive on the edge of town. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer raised his gavel, ready to call it a day and move on with his life. Elena's hand shot up before her brain could stop it. $1. The warehouse fell silent. Every head turned toward the back wall, where a woman in a faded jacket and worn jeans stood with a little girl. Elena felt their stares like physical weight, judgment, confusion, pity. She lifted her chin, refusing to look away. The auctioneer blinked. "I have $1. Do I hear $2? Silence. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered something that sounded like crazy, but Elena kept her hand raised, her jaw set. "Fair warning, ma'am. This is salvage rights only. The ship is underwater. You're bidding on a wreck." "I understand." Elena's voice came out stronger than she felt. $1. The auctioneer shrugged. "Sold to the lady in the back for $1. The gavel fell with a crack that seemed to echo through Elena's chest. "Congratulations on your cruise ship." The laughter that followed them out of the warehouse stung worse than Rosa's rejection. Elena heard the comments, meant to be overheard. What's she going to do with a sunken ship? Probably thinks there's treasure aboard. Poor kid. Having a mother like that. Elena kept walking, Sofia's hand tight in hers, the salvage deed burning in her jacket pocket like a brand. She'd just spent one of their last $87 on a sunken cruise ship. Marco would have called it the most Elena thing she'd ever done. Reckless, impulsive, stupid. But Marco wasn't here anymore. The harbour master's office was closing when Elena arrived, out of breath from running the 6 blocks with Sofia bouncing on her hip. A tired woman in her 50s looked up from her computer, clearly ready to go home. I just bought salvage rights to the SS Meridian Star. Elena placed the deed on the counter. I need information about the ship. The woman studied the deed. Then Elena, her expression shifting from annoyance to something resembling sympathy. You bought that wreck? Honey, I don't know what you're thinking, but please. Elena hated the desperation in her voice. Just tell me what you know about it. The woman sighed, pulled up a file on her computer. Built in 1958. Luxury liner. Did Caribbean cruises for 30 years before being sold to a private owner in 1989. Some tech millionaire named Richard Castellanos. He converted it into a floating mansion, kept it docked here, paid dock fees like clockwork until 3 years ago when the payments stopped. Ship started taking on water. We tried to contact Castellanos, but he'd disappeared. No family we could find. Ship finally sank last March. Is there a manifest, records of what was aboard? The woman scrolled through files. Nothing detailed. When it was a cruise ship, sure. But after Castellanos bought it, she shook her head. Private ownership. He could have had anything aboard. Or nothing. Elena's hands trembled as she took back the deed. Can I access the ship? It's in 40 feet of water in the commercial harbor. You'd need diving equipment, permits, insurance. The woman's voice gentled. Honey, I don't know your situation, but that ship is going to cost you a fortune in fees alone. Storage, environmental impact, eventual removal. The city's been patient, but they're going to start billing you monthly charges within 30 days. Sofia had fallen asleep against Elena's shoulder, her breath warm against her mother's neck. Elena kissed her daughter's forehead, the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo steadying her. Thank you for your help. Outside, the harbor stretched before them in the fading light. Somewhere beneath those dark waters lay a 500-foot cruise ship that now belonged to her. Elena had no diving equipment, no boat, no plan. She had $86, a sleeping daughter, and a crazy hope that maybe, somehow, this wasn't the biggest mistake of her life. The seaside motel cost $45 for one night. The room smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke. The carpet was stained beyond recognition, and the single bed sagged in the middle, but it had a lock on the door and running water. Elena lay awake while Sofia slept, staring at the water-stained ceiling and trying to figure out what she'd done. In the morning, with $41 left, Elena walked to the public library. Sofia colored with the crayons they kept for children, while Elena hunted through databases and old newspaper archives. She learned that Richard Castellanos had been worth over $400 million when he disappeared. His tech company, Castellanos Innovations, had revolutionized something involving computer chips in the early 1980 seconds. He'd sold the company in 1988, bought the SS Meridian Star in 1989, and spent millions converting it into what news articles called the ultimate floating estate. Then, nothing. No news stories after 1999. No obituaries. No bankruptcy filings. Richard Castellanos had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. Elena's stomach growled loud, enough that the librarian glanced over. She'd given Sofia the last granola bar from her purse for breakfast. Lunch would have to be more creative. Excuse me. A man's voice interrupted her research. Elena looked up to find an elderly man with kind eyes and weathered hands standing beside her table. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. He wore work clothes and had the look of someone who'd spent his life around boats. I saw you at the auction yesterday. You bought the Meridian Star. Elena tensed, protective instincts flaring. Yes. The man pulled out a chair, sitting slowly like his joints hurt. Name's Captain Joe Martinez. I worked on that ship back when she was still sailing. Chief Engineer, 1965 to 1978. Best years of my life. His eyes held distant memories. When I heard someone finally bought the salvage rights, I had to meet them. Didn't expect, he gestured vaguely at Elena and Sofia. Didn't expect a broke single mother with no experience. Elena kept her voice neutral. Joe's expression softened. I was going to say, didn't expect someone who'd care. Everyone else at that auction was calculating scrap metal value. He leaned forward. That ship was beautiful once. Carried thousands of passengers to paradise and back. She deserves better than being cut up for parts. I don't have money for salvage operations. Elena heard the defeat in her own voice. Note, I can barely afford breakfast. Joe studied her for a long moment. Why'd you buy her then? Elena looked at Sofia, coloring happily, oblivious to their situation. Because everyone was laughing. Because they all thought it was worthless. Because, she met Joe's eyes. Because I'm tired of being told what's impossible. Joe nodded slowly, as if she'd passed some test. I might be able to help with that. I've got diving equipment, been diving for 50 years, and I know that ship like the back of my hand. Every deck, every cabin, every hidden space. He paused. Castellanos made modifications, added things. I heard rumors from dock workers who did the conversion. They signed NDAs, but talk is cheap when you're drinking. Elena's heart began to race. What kind of rumors? The kind that made me wonder what a man worth hundreds of millions would hide on a ship he lived on alone for a decade. Joe's weathered face creased with something between hope and mischief. You willing to find out? That afternoon, Elena stood on the dock beside Joe's small fishing boat, looking out at the water where the SS Meridian Star rested on the harbor bottom. Joe had spent 2 hours gathering equipment, checking tanks, preparing for a dive. Elena had spent that time in a state of suspended disbelief, unable to process that this might actually be happening. I'll do an initial survey, Joe explained, pulling on his wetsuit. See what condition she's in. Check for obvious hazards. Look for entry points. With any luck, I'll be down about 40 minutes. Sofia sat on a dock, piling, swinging her legs. Is he going to find treasure like in my stories? Elena hugged her daughter close. I don't know, baby, but we're going to find out. Joe's splash echoed across the quiet harbor. Elena watched bubbles rise to the surface, marking his progress. Minutes crawled by. 15, 20, 30. Each passing minute felt like an hour. What if something went wrong? What if the ship had collapsed? What if Joe's head broke the surface with a gasp? He pulled out his regulator, face flushed with exertion, and something else. Excitement. She's intact. He swam to the boat, pulled himself aboard with surprising agility for his age, listing about 30 degrees to port, but, structurally, sound. Most importantly, he pulled off his mask, eyes bright. The modifications Castellanos made? They're still there. Reinforced sections, sealed compartments, places that shouldn't exist on a standard cruise ship. He gripped Elena's arm. That man was hiding something. I'd stake my life on it. Elena felt hope and fear warring in her chest. Can you access those compartments? With proper equipment and time? Yes. But Elena, Joe's expression grew serious. If there is something valuable down there, word will get out. People will come looking. You need to be careful who you trust. As if summoned by his warning, a black sedan pulled up to the dock. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, his shoes too polished for the weathered planks. He approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Miss Rodriguez, I'm David Thornton, representing interested parties in marine salvage operations. He produced a business card. I understand you've acquired salvage rights to the SS Meridian Star. My clients would like to make you an offer. Elena took the card, her stomach sinking. How did you know my name? Thornton smiled without warmth. It's a matter of public record. The auction. The deed transfer. My clients move quickly when opportunities arise. He glanced at the diving equipment. At Joe still, in his wetsuit. I see you're already conducting preliminary surveys. Smart. But let me save you time and money. My clients will pay you $50,000 cash for complete transfer of salvage rights. Today. No questions asked. $50,000. The number hung in the air like a mirage. That was more money than Elena had seen in her entire life. It could mean an apartment, food, security for Sofia, everything they desperately needed. Why would your clients pay $50,000 for a worthless sunken ship? Joe's voice cut through Elena's racing thoughts. Thornton's smile didn't waver. Because they have the resources and equipment for proper salvage operations. The ship may yield valuable scrap metal, historical artifacts. They're taking the risk that Miss Rodriguez cannot afford. Elena looked at the water, where bubbles from Joe's dive still disturbed the surface. At Sofia, innocent and trusting. At the card in her hand, with its embossed lettering. I need to think about it. Thornton's smile tightened. The offer expires at noon tomorrow. After that, my clients will pursue other opportunities. He returned to his sedan, leaving Elena holding the card and wondering if she'd just made another terrible mistake by not accepting immediately. That night, in their $45 motel room, Elena did math on the back of receipts. $50,000 minus taxes would leave maybe $35,000. A decent used car, security deposits on an apartment, a buffer while she found work. It was the smart choice, the responsible choice, the choice Marco would have wanted her to make for Sofia's sake. But something nagged at her. Why would anyone pay $50,000 for a ship they could have bought for $1 yesterday? Why the pressure to decide quickly? Why? No questions asked. Mummy. Sofia's sleepy voice came from the sagging bed. Are we going to be okay? Elena curled up beside her daughter, breathing in her scent. Yes, baby. We're going to be okay. I promise. She'd made that promise before the night Marco died, when Sofia cried, asking where Daddy went. Elena had promised they'd be okay, and then spent 2 years barely surviving, watching her savings drain, accepting her sister-in-law's charity until even that ran out. How many more empty promises could she make? Her phone buzzed. A text from Joe. Found something. Need to show you. Tomorrow morning. Early. Elena stared at the message, then at the business card on the nightstand. Tomorrow at noon, Thornton's offer would expire. But tomorrow morning, Joe wanted to show her something. She knew which choice made sense. knew what any responsible mother would do. Take the money, secure their future, stop chasing impossible dreams. But Elena had spent 2 years being responsible, being sensible, playing it safe, and she'd still ended up on the street, with nothing. Maybe it was time to take the risk everyone said was crazy. Maybe Marco had been right about her all along. She was at her best when she stopped thinking and started believing in the impossible. Elena closed her eyes, Sofia warm and safe beside her, and made her decision. Dawn broke cold and grey over the harbour. Elena stood on the dock with Sofia bundled in her jacket, watching Joe prepare for another dive. She hadn't slept much, kept awake by second-guessing and worry, and a strange electric hope that felt dangerous. "You sure about this?" Joe asked, checking his air tanks. "That $50,000 would change your life. That's why I'm sure they're lying." Elena's voice was steady, despite her churning stomach. "Nobody pays that much for nothing. Which means there's something down there worth more than 50,000. Joe grinned, his weathered face crinkling. "You're either very smart or very crazy. My late husband would say both." The dive lasted longer this time. Joe had explained he'd found what looked like a sealed entrance to a modified cargo hold on the second deck. With proper tools, he might be able to access it. Elena watched the dock, nervous that Thornton might appear early, might somehow stop them. 45 minutes later, Joe surfaced. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he climbed into the boat. He pulled a waterproof bag from his equipment, set it carefully in front of Elena, and just stared at her. "Joe, what did you find?" "I got into the sealed hold." His voice was rough. "Elena, you need to see this." He opened the bag. Inside, wrapped in plastic and remarkably dry despite decades underwater, were photographs. But not just any photographs, surveillance photos, hundreds of them, images of people, buildings, documents, and in one plastic envelope, a leather-bound journal. Elena's hands trembled as she opened the journal. The first page, in neat handwriting, "If you're reading this, I'm either dead or disappeared. Good. This is my insurance policy. Everything they wanted buried is documented here. Every name, every transaction, every crime. I spent 10 years collecting evidence against people who thought they were untouchable. The day they figure out what I know, I'll be gone. But the truth stays aboard the Meridian Star, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it to light." It was signed Richard Castellanos. Elena flipped through pages filled with detailed notes, dates, names she recognized from news stories. Political corruption, corporate fraud, money laundering. Castellanos hadn't just disappeared, he'd been hiding evidence of crimes that would shake the foundations of wealth and power. "There's more." Joe's voice was barely above a whisper. "The photographs are just the start." He mentions a safe, a captain's safe in the bridge, behind a false wall. Says it contains the actual documents, hard evidence, and, he met Elena's eyes, he says it contains something else, something valuable he collected as his own insurance. In case evidence wasn't enough, he calls it liquid assets that can't be traced. Sofia tugged Elena's hand. "Mummy, what's wrong? You look scared." Elena pulled her daughter close, mind racing. This wasn't treasure. This was something far more dangerous. Evidence that could destroy powerful people. Evidence that Thornton's clients were probably desperate to bury forever. "Joe, we need to call the police, the FBI, someone, and tell them what?" Joe gestured to the water. That there's evidence of crimes locked in a safe on a sunken ship. They'll investigate, which means delays, bureaucracy. Meanwhile, whoever hired Thornton will have time to get to that safe first. You own the salvage rights, Elena. Legally, whatever's aboard belongs to you. But you need to get to it before they do. Elena looked at her daughter's innocent face, at the journal in her hands, at the dark water hiding secrets worth killing for. The responsible choice would be walking away, taking Thornton's money, letting someone else deal with this. But Castellanos had chosen to hide this evidence, had spent years documenting crimes, creating insurance, waiting for someone to find it. And that someone had turned out to be a broke single mother who'd bought a sunken ship for $1 because she was tired of being told what was impossible. How long would it take to reach the bridge safe? Joe's expression shifted to respect. 3, maybe 4 dives with proper equipment. We'd need to cut through walls, navigate flooded corridors. It's dangerous, Elena. The ship could shift. Corridors could collapse. But you could do it? I could do it. He paused. Question is, should we? Elena thought about Marco, who died suddenly of an undiagnosed heart condition at 32, leaving her alone and struggling. Thought about Rosa changing the locks, society judging her for being poor, people laughing at the desperate woman buying a worthless ship. Thought about Sofia, who deserved a mother brave enough to fight for what was right. We should. We're going to bring up that safe, find out what Castellanos was protecting, and make sure the truth comes to light. She looked at the journal. And, if there's money or valuables, that's ours. Legally, ethically, ours. We're not criminals. We're salvage operators recovering the property we own. Joe grinned, looking 10 years younger. Then, we better get started. Because once Thornton realizes you're not selling, things are going to get complicated. By noon, when David Thornton called, Elena was ready. She stood on the dock with her phone on speaker so Joe could hear. Miss Rodriguez, I trust you've considered our offer. I have. The answer is no. Silence stretched for 3 seconds. Miss Rodriguez, I don't think you understand the situation. I understand perfectly. You want the salvage rights because you know there's something valuable aboard. But it's mine. The ship, the contents, everything, legally purchased. So, unless your clients want to make a real offer, say $10 million, I'm not interested. She heard muffled conversation on Thornton's end, voices conferring. When he came back on, his tone had shifted from confident to cautious. 10 million is excessive. However, my clients might consider $500,000, $500,000. Elena's breath caught. That was life-changing money. But if they were willing to go from 50,000 to 500,000, what was really down there? 1 million. Final offer. Take it or leave it. Elena forced confidence into her voice she didn't feel. I'll need to consult with my clients. But, Miss Rodriguez, Thornton's voice dropped, losing its professional veneer. You should know, these are not people you want as enemies. Take the money. Walk away while you still can. The threat was clear. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. I'll wait for your call about the $1 million. Otherwise, I have salvage operations to conduct. She hung up, her hand shaking. Joe was staring at her with something between admiration and concern. That was either very brave or very stupid. You said that about buying the ship too. Elena managed a weak smile. How long do we have? Until they try something. Could be hours, could be days. Depends how desperate they are. Joe started gathering equipment. We need to work fast. Get to that safe before they can stop us. Over the next 3 days, Elena learned more about diving, salvage operations, and underwater navigation than she'd ever imagined. Joe was a patient teacher, showing her basic diving skills in the shallow areas, while he worked on accessing the bridge. Sofia stayed with Joe's wife, Maria, a kind woman who asked no questions and made sure Sofia had regular meals and a safe place to sleep. Each night, Elena crashed in their guest room, so exhausted she could barely shower before falling asleep. Each morning, she woke before dawn, driven by a mixture of hope and fear. They were racing against an invisible clock, knowing Thornton's clients were planning something. On the 4th day, Joe surfaced with triumph in his eyes. "I'm in. The bridge is accessible. I found the captain's quarters, found the false wall. The safe is there. Elena. It's there." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Can you open it? It's a combination lock, old school." But Castellanos left a clue in his journal. Joe pulled himself onto the boat, water streaming from his suit. "You remember that string of numbers on page 17? I think they're the combination." They spent that afternoon poring over the journal, finding the sequence: 18473309. The numbers had seemed random, but now they felt like destiny. Joe explained it would take 2 more dives, one to attempt opening the safe, another to bring up its contents if successful. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in Joe and Maria's guest room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. The safe could be empty, the combination could be wrong, or it could contain evidence and assets that would change everything. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, Elena answered. "Miss Rodriguez." David Thornton's voice was cold. "My clients have authorized me to make a final offer. $2 million for the salvage rights, transferred within 24 hours. This is your last chance to walk away." $2 million. The number was staggering. Elena thought about apartments, security, Sofia's education, never worrying about money again. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Why are they so desperate? Thornton was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, tired, almost human. Because Richard Castellanos was supposed to disappear with his secrets. Instead, he left a time bomb floating in the harbor. My clients have spent 30 years believing it sank with him. Then you showed up and bought it for $1. He paused. "Elena, I've been in this business a long time. I've seen what happens to people who get between powerful men and their secrets. Take the money, please." There was genuine concern in his voice, maybe even fear. But Elena thought about Castellanos, hiding evidence of crimes because he believed someone would care enough to bring it to light. About all the victims of those crimes who deserved justice. About Sofia, who deserved to grow up in a world where truth mattered more than power. Tell your clients the salvage rights aren't for sale. The SS Meridian Star is mine. Whatever secrets she holds belong to the truth now. She hung up and turned off her phone. Dawn broke with unusual clarity, the harbor calm as glass. Joe made his final preparations while Elena helped, her hands steadier than she expected. This was it. Today they'd know. "You should wait on shore," Joe said gently. "If something goes wrong, then we'll deal with it together." Elena's voice was firm. "I'm not sitting on the sidelines. Not anymore. Joe nodded, respecting her resolve. Then, let's go find out what Castellanos left behind. The dive seemed to last forever. Elena stayed on the boat, watching bubbles, checking her watch. Every few minutes. Sofia was safe with Maria. The dock was quiet. Everything felt suspended, waiting. When Joe's head broke the surface 45 minutes later, he was dragging something. A waterproof container, custom-built, probably 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. His face was split in a grin so wide it looked painful. Got it. Got the whole damn thing. He hauled the container onto the boat, with Elena's help. It was heavy, solid, sealed with modern waterproof technology that had kept its contents dry for 30 years. The safe was right where he said. Combination worked on the first try. This was inside. Along with, he pulled a smaller waterproof bag from his vest. These. He opened the bag. Elena gasped. Diamonds. Dozens of them, loose, catching the morning light in rainbow fire. Gold coins, bearer bonds in waterproof sleeves, and cash, stacks of $100 bills, vacuum sealed and perfectly preserved. That's not all. Joe's hands shook as he opened the larger container. Inside were files, hundreds of files, photographs, bank statements, recorded conversations on waterproof media, all meticulously labeled and organized, and a letter addressed to whoever finds this. Elena read it aloud, her voice breaking. If you're reading this, you've earned the right to make a choice. The evidence in this container documents crimes committed by 18 people, politicians, CEOs, criminals, who thought their wealth and power made them untouchable. I spent 10 years collecting this information as insurance. When I realized they intended to silence me, I disappeared before they could act, taking their secrets with me. I've hidden them aboard my ship, knowing one day someone would find them. Here's your choice. Take the diamonds, the bonds, the cash, approximately $8.5 million in liquid assets. It's yours. You've earned it through salvage rights. Walk away rich and let sleeping dogs lie. Or take everything to the authorities. Risk the retaliation that drove me into hiding. Fight for justice that may never come. It's a terrible choice, and I'm sorry to burden you with it. But someone needs to decide if the truth matters more than safety. Choose wisely. Richard Castellanos. Elena sat back, the weight of the decision crushing her. $8.5 million. Plus, whatever the evidence might be worth in reward money, if she chose to turn it in. Or she could take the diamonds and cash, give Thornton's clients the files, let justice remain buried. What are you going to do? Joe's voice was quiet. Elena thought about her sister-in-law changing the locks, the auction crowd laughing, Thornton's threats, all the times society had told her to know her place, accept her circumstances, stop reaching for impossible things. Then she thought about Sofia, watching her mother's choices, learning what integrity meant. About Marco, who'd always said Elena was too stubborn to let anyone tell her what was right or wrong. About the victims in these files, who deserved someone to care. I'm going to do both. Elena's voice was steady. We're keeping the diamonds and cash that's ours legally. But the evidence? She met Joe's eyes. That goes to the FBI. Today. Because some things matter more than money. Joe grinned. Marco would be proud. Yeah. Elena touched the letter, feeling Castellanos reaching across time. He really would. They called the FBI from Maria's house, speaking to an agent who initially sounded skeptical until Elena started reading names from the files. His tone shifted dramatically. Within 2 hours, 3 federal agents were in Maria's living room, examining the evidence with expressions that moved from disbelief to grim determination. "Miss Rodriguez, you understand what you're handing over." The lead agent, a woman named Sarah Chen, looked at Elena with respect. "This evidence could trigger investigations that last years. You'll be called to testify about the salvage, the discovery. Your life will be scrutinized." "I understand, but this is the right thing to do." Agent Chen nodded slowly. "The Bureau will likely authorize a substantial finder's fee. Evidence of this magnitude, if it leads to convictions." She paused, calculating. "You could be looking at 10% of assets recovered. That could mean millions." Elena hadn't even considered that. She'd been so focused on doing the right thing that the possibility of reward hadn't registered. "I don't want to profit from other people's crimes. Keep the money. Use it for victims' funds, for justice. I just want to make sure the truth comes out." The 3 agents exchanged glances. Agent Chen extended her hand. "Miss Rodriguez, in 15 years with the Bureau, I've met maybe 3 people with your integrity. It's an honor." As the agents loaded the evidence into secure vehicles, Elena stood with Sofia and Joe, watching justice finally being served. The diamonds and cash were legally hers, the finder's fee for salvage rights to property aboard a ship she owned. Combined with what Agent Chen estimated in official rewards she couldn't refuse, Elena was looking at somewhere around $12 million. $12 million, from $1 and a crazy risk. But the money wasn't what made her hands shake. It was the knowledge that 18 criminals who thought they'd escaped justice were about to face consequences. That Castellanos's decade of hidden evidence would finally matter. That a broke single mother who everyone dismissed had just changed everything. David Thornton appeared 3 days later, just as Elena had expected. She met him at a coffee shop, Sofia coloring at the next table, while Joe stood nearby, a quiet presence. Thornton looked like he'd aged 10 years. He sat down heavily, not meeting her eyes. "You went to the FBI?" "I did. My clients are displeased." "Your clients are criminals who deserve prison." Elena's voice was calm. "And I imagine they're about to have bigger problems than being displeased." Thornton finally looked at her. "I was hired to stop you, to get those files back by any means necessary. I've done things in my career I'm not proud of. But this," he shook his head. "I can't. I won't. You did the right thing, Elena. The hard thing." He stood, placed a card on the table. "If you need security, protection, anything, call me. I'm done with my clients. But you should know they won't stop easily." He walked away, leaving Elena holding a business card and wondering if she'd just made an ally or gained another enemy. The news broke 2 weeks later. Massive federal investigation launched into decades-old corruption. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. Elena's name was initially kept confidential, but in a town like theirs, anonymity was impossible. Within days, reporters were camped outside Maria's house. Lawyers were calling, and through it all, Elena held Sofia close and tried to explain why their lives had suddenly become a circus. The preliminary investigative findings were staggering. Castellanos's evidence documented $2.3 billion in fraud, corruption, and money laundering, involving 18 defendants across 3 decades. The cases would take years to prosecute, but federal prosecutors were confident in convictions, which meant Elena's official finder's fee calculated as a percentage of assets recovered, would be substantial. The final number, when it came, was beyond comprehension. After all official calculations, legal fees, and taxes, Elena's total payment from salvage rights and finder's fees was $302 million. $302 million from buying a sunken cruise ship for $1. Elena sat in a lawyer's office, staring at the number on the paperwork, unable to process it. Beside her, Sofia played with toys the law firm had thoughtfully provided. The senior partner, a man named Marcus Reed, smiled gently. "Miss Rodriguez, I know this is overwhelming, but this money is legally yours. The salvage rights were legitimate. The finder's fees are standard federal practice. You've done nothing wrong, in fact. You've done something incredibly right. I just wanted to help Sofia, to give her a home." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "I never expected. No one ever expects this." Marcus handed her a box of tissues. "But here's what I want you to understand. You didn't win the lottery. You took a risk, everyone said was crazy. You worked hard with Joe to salvage that ship. You made the ethical choice to turn over evidence when you could have buried it. You've earned every penny through courage and integrity. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for that." The words helped. Over the following weeks, as Elena set up trusts, hired financial advisors, and made plans for their new life, she gradually accepted that this was real. The money wasn't going to vanish. She really was wealthy beyond imagination. But wealth brought new challenges. Old friends appeared, wanting to reconnect. Strangers with sob stories asked for help. Family members she barely knew suddenly remembered they were related. Elena learned to guard her privacy, screen her calls, and trust very few people. Through it all, Joe and Maria remained constant. When Elena tried to give them money as thanks, they refused. "We didn't do this for a reward," Joe said firmly. "We did it because it was right, because you reminded us that sometimes the crazy risks are worth taking." Eventually, Elena compromised by setting up a marine conservation charity in their name, funding it with $10 million. Joe could spend his retirement doing what he loved, protecting the ocean while refusing to profit personally from the discovery. Sofia adjusted to wealth with a child's resilience. Elena bought them a modest but comfortable home, nothing ostentatious, just a safe place with a yard and good schools nearby. She invested conservatively, ensuring Sofia's future was secure through generations, and she donated substantial amounts to causes that mattered: homeless shelters, women's shelters, programs for single parents. 6 months after the discovery, Elena stood at the harbor, looking at the water where the SS Meridian Star still rested. The city had finally begun salvage operations to remove the ship, properly funded now that environmental concerns were being addressed. Soon, the cruise liner would be gone, cut up for scrap, her secrets fully revealed. "Thank you," Elena whispered to the water, "to Castellanos, to the ship that had changed everything. Thank you for waiting for someone like me." A text buzzed her phone. "Agent Chen. First conviction today. Senator Daniels, 15 years. Your evidence made it happen. Thank you for your courage." Elena smiled, forwarding the text to Joe. Justice was slow, but it was coming. Castellanos' sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The truth he'd spent a decade documenting was finally bringing down people who thought they were untouchable. And a single mother who'd bought a sunken cruise ship for $1 had proven that sometimes the craziest risks led to the most important victories. Sofia ran up, breathless from playing in the nearby park. "Mummy, can we get ice cream?" Elena scooped up her daughter, holding her close. They had a home now, security, a future without fear. But more than that, they had the knowledge that they'd done the right thing when it would have been easier to do nothing. "Yes, baby, we can get all the ice cream you want." As they walked away from the harbor, Elena didn't look back. The SS Meridian Star had given her everything she needed, not just money, but the courage to believe in impossible things, the strength to fight for what was right, the wisdom to know that some treasures can't be measured in dollars. Behind them, the sun set over the water, where a cruise ship had waited 30 years for someone brave enough to take a $1 risk. The ship would be gone soon, dismantled and forgotten. But the truth she'd carried would endure. The lives she'd changed would ripple forward through time. And a little girl named Sofia would grow up knowing her mother had been strong enough to choose justice over safety. The SS Meridian Star's final voyage had ended decades ago, but her legacy, the truth, the justice, the hope she'd preserved, had just begun to sail. 1 year later, Elena stood in a federal courtroom as the last of the 18 defendants was sentenced. Congressman Raymond Blackwell, who'd spent 40 years hiding behind power and money, would spend the next 20 years in prison. His assets, seized under federal law, would fund victim compensation for decades. Agent Chen found Elena in the hallway afterward. "It's over. All 18 convicted. $2.3 billion in assets recovered. Hundreds of victims compensated. Congressional investigations launched. SEC reforms implemented." She shook her head in wonder. "Miss Rodriguez, when you bought that ship, you had no idea what you were starting. I just needed somewhere to live." Elena laughed, the sound surprising her. "I was homeless with an $86. A sunken cruise ship seemed like my only option. And it turned out to be the best option." Agent Chen smiled. "Your finder's fees, combined with commendations from 3 federal agencies, additional reward money from various organizations. Final total is $311 million after all, taxes and fees. You're one of the wealthiest women in the state." Elena shook her head, still unable to fully process the numbers. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real, and you earned every penny. Not by luck, but by courage." Agent Chen handed her a folder. "These are letters from some of the victims your evidence helped. People who've been fighting for justice for decades. People who'd given up hope until you came along. I thought you might want to read them." That night, Elena read through the letters, tears streaming down her face. A woman whose husband had been killed for threatening to expose corruption. An accountant who'd been blackmailed into silence. A journalist whose career had been destroyed for asking the wrong questions. Dozens of people who'd been silenced, threatened, broken by the criminals Castellanos had documented. And now, thanks to a broke single mother and a sunken ship, they finally had justice. Sofia climbed into her lap, wiping her mother's tears. "Why are you crying, Mummy?" "Because sometimes good things happen to good people. And sometimes broken things can be fixed." Elena held her daughter close, thinking about the SS Meridian Star, resting on the harbor bottom. About Castellanos, who'd disappeared rather than be silenced. About the impossible journey from $1 to 300 million, but mostly, she thought about the moment at that auction when everyone was laughing, when the smart choice would have been walking away, when raising her hand for a $1 bid on a sunken ship seemed like the craziest thing she could possibly do. Sometimes, the craziest choices were the bravest ones. Sometimes, the worthless things held the greatest value. And sometimes, when the whole world told you to give up and settle for less, the only way forward was to raise your hand and bid on the impossible. Elena had learned that truth in the hardest way possible, but she'd learned it. And now, holding Sofia in their safe, comfortable home, surrounded by security and possibility and hope, she knew she'd make the same choice again. Every single time. The SS Meridian Star was gone now, dismantled and recycled. But her legacy lived on, in the convictions, in the victims who finally had closure, in the reforms that would prevent future corruption, and in a little girl named Sofia, who would grow up knowing her mother had looked at a sunken ship and seen opportunity, had faced powerful enemies and chosen truth, had risked everything for justice. 3 years had passed since the final conviction, and Elena barely recognized the woman she'd become. Not in appearance, she still wore jeans and simple shirts, still pulled her dark hair into a practical ponytail, but in confidence, in the quiet certainty that came from surviving the impossible and emerging stronger. She stood now in the marble lobby of the Rodriguez Foundation headquarters, a building she'd purchased and renovated in the warehouse district, the same neighborhood where she'd once walked with Sofia, hungry and homeless, searching for day labor jobs that never materialized. Now this building employed 47 people dedicated to helping families in crisis. Miss Rodriguez, her assistant, a young woman named Lucia, approached with a tablet. "The Thornton meeting is in 10 minutes. He's already here, waiting in conference room B." Elena nodded, her stomach tightening slightly. David Thornton had become an unlikely fixture in her life. After walking away from his criminal clients 3 years ago, he'd spent 18 months testifying in federal trials, his insider knowledge crucial to securing convictions. The experience had transformed him. The smooth, threatening corporate fixer had been replaced by someone haunted, seeking redemption. He'd contacted Elena 6 months ago with a proposal. He wanted to work for her foundation, using his investigative skills to identify fraud in charitable organizations, to protect vulnerable people from the kind of predators he'd once served. Elena had been skeptical, but Thornton had been persistent. He'd worked without pay for 3 months, proving his commitment, before she'd finally agreed to bring him on staff. Now he sat in the conference room, looking older than his 52 years, gray threading through his dark hair. He stood when Elena entered, the gesture respectful rather than performative. "Elena, thank you for seeing me." He gestured to a folder on the table. "I've found something that connects back to the Meridian Star case." Elena sat, her interest piqued despite her caution. "I thought all 18 defendants were convicted. The cases are closed." "They are, but there was always a 19th person, the one who coordinated everything, who Castellanos never managed to identify." Thornton opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents. "I've been following financial trails, looking for patterns. 3 days ago, I found something." He spread out bank statements, corporate filings, photographs of transactions. Someone's been moving money, large amounts, using the same laundering techniques as the original 18, but carefully, slowly, learning from their mistakes. "I think it's the person who ordered Castellanos killed." Elena felt ice creep down her spine. Castellanos wasn't killed. He disappeared voluntarily. That's what everyone believed, including me, until I started digging deeper. Thornton pulled out a death certificate, dated 2003. Richard Castellanos died in a car accident in Mexico City 14 years ago. Single vehicle crash on a mountain road. Mexican authorities ruled it an accident. Case closed. But you don't think it was an accident. I think someone found him, killed him, then spent the next 14 years believing his evidence had died with him, until you dragged it up from the harbor. Thornton met her eyes. Elena, whoever this is, they're still out there, still committing crimes. And they know you're the reason their entire network collapsed. Elena thought about Sofia, now 9 years old, thriving in private school. Thought about the security measures she'd implemented after the first conviction guards, cameras, panic rooms. She'd hoped those were temporary precautions. But if Thornton was right, the danger had never really ended. What do you want from me? Permission to investigate. Officially, through the Foundation, we have resources now, connections with law enforcement. I can build a case, but I need your authority to pursue it. Thornton's voice was urgent. This person orchestrated billions in fraud, Elena. They're responsible for at least 3 deaths that I can prove, probably more. They need to be stopped. Elena studied the documents, her mind racing. She'd built a life focused on helping people, on moving forward rather than looking back. But if someone dangerous was still out there, still hurting people, could she really ignore it? I'll need to discuss this with Joe and Maria, with Agent Chen. I won't make this decision alone. She gathered the documents. Give me 48 hours. That evening, Elena sat in Joe and Maria's kitchen, the familiar space grounding her. Sofia was upstairs with Maria, working on homework. Joe listened to Elena's explanation of Thornton's findings, his weathered face thoughtful. You trust him? Joe asked finally. Thornton, man worked for some evil people. I think he's trying to make amends. But trust? Elena shook her head. I don't know. That's why I'm here. I need perspective from people who knew me before the money, before everything changed. Maria set down coffee mugs, settling beside her husband. 3 years ago, you made the hard choice to expose those criminals. You knew it would be dangerous, but you did it anyway, because it was right. She covered Elena's hand with her own. This feels like the same choice. Except, 3 years ago, I had nothing to lose. Now, I have Sofia to protect. The Foundation, employees who depend on me. I'm not just risking myself anymore. Joe sipped his coffee, considering. Castellanos had everything to lose too. His life, his freedom, his safety. He gathered that evidence anyway. Sometimes the people who have the most to lose are the ones who need to stand up most. He met Elena's gaze. Question is, can you live with yourself if you don't? Elena knew the answer. She'd known it the moment Thornton showed her those documents. Some responsibilities came with wealth and power, whether you wanted them or not. She'd been given resources most people couldn't imagine. Using them to hide from danger, while others suffered, wasn't an option she could accept. I'll call Agent Chen in the morning. If the FBI thinks Thornton's findings have merit, I'll authorize the investigation. Agent Sarah Chen arrived at the Foundation 2 days later with 2 other agents and a senior prosecutor. They spent 4 hours reviewing Thornton's evidence, asking pointed questions, verifying sources. When they finally finished, Chen's expression was grim. This is solid work. Preliminary, but solid. We'd need months to build a prosecutable case, but the patterns are there. She looked at Elena. Mr. Thornton would need to work closely with our team, share everything he finds. And Elena, you need to understand, if he's right about this person orchestrating Castellanos's death, they're extremely dangerous. Funding this investigation puts you directly in their crosshairs. I'm already there, Elena replied. I was there the moment I turned over Castellanos's evidence. At least this way, we're moving forward instead of waiting for them to come after me. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Rebecca Morrison, leaned forward. We'll provide protection, upgraded security for you and Sofia, for your foundation employees. But Miss Rodriguez, these investigations can take years. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment? Elena thought about the letters from victims she'd read, about the people still suffering while a 19th criminal walked free, about Sofia, who deserved to grow up in a world where justice mattered. Yes, I'm prepared. The investigation began quietly. Thornton worked from a secure office in the Foundation, coordinating with FBI agents, following financial trails that wound through dozens of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Elena continued her Foundation work, trying to maintain normalcy for Sofia, while security personnel shadowed their every move. 2 months into the investigation, Thornton called Elena into his office, excitement barely contained. I found the connection, the person coordinating everything. He pulled up a photograph on his computer. Meet Catherine Blackwell, daughter of Congressman Raymond Blackwell. Elena stared at the image. Catherine Blackwell was 43, impeccably dressed, with the polished appearance of old money and power. She served on multiple corporate boards, chaired several charitable organizations, and by all public accounts was a pillar of the community. Her father's in prison because of the evidence I found. Exactly. And Catherine's been running her own operation for 20 years. Separate from but coordinated with her father's crimes. When you exposed him, you destroyed half her network. She's been rebuilding, but carefully. Thornton pulled up bank records. She's also been liquidating assets, moving money overseas. I think she's preparing to disappear, just like Castellanos did. We can't let that happen. Elena reached for her phone. Agent Chen needs to see this immediately. Within a week, the FBI had enough evidence for search warrants. The simultaneous raids on Catherine Blackwell's properties and businesses made national headlines. Federal agents seized computers, documents, and financial records that would take months to fully analyze. Catherine herself was arrested at her estate, her composed facade cracking only when agents led her away in handcuffs. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Elena found herself once again at the center of a major federal investigation. Though this time she was prepared. She gave carefully worded statements through her attorney, declined interview requests, and focused on protecting Sofia from the attention. But not everyone was content to leave them alone. 3 days after Catherine's arrest, Elena's head of security found a letter that had bypassed normal screening. Inside was a single sentence, typed on plain paper. You've destroyed 2 generations of my family. I'll destroy yours. Agent Chen took the threat seriously, doubling security and assigning protective details to everyone Elena cared about. Joe and Maria received protection. The Foundation was swept for surveillance devices, Sofia's school implemented new security protocols. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Elena told Chen during a late-night meeting in the Foundation's secure conference room. "I brought this danger into our lives." "No," Chen corrected firmly. "Catherine Blackwell brought this danger when she chose to commit crimes. You're just refusing to let her get away with it." She paused. "I won't lie to you, Elena. Catherine's family has resources, connections. Even from custody, she could orchestrate retaliation. But backing down now means letting her win, letting her crimes continue. Is that what you want?" Elena thought about the question for a long time. Finally, she shook her head. "No, we finish this, but I need to explain everything to Sofia. She deserves to understand why our lives have become so complicated." That conversation with her daughter was one of the hardest things Elena had ever done. She sat Sofia down in their secure home, guards stationed outside, and tried to explain why bad people sometimes threatened good people who stood up to them. Sofia listened with the serious attention she brought to difficult subjects. When Elena finished, her daughter was quiet for several minutes before speaking. "The ship, finding all that evidence, you did that to help people, right? People who'd been hurt by criminals?" "Yes, baby. That's exactly why." "And now you're helping catch another bad person who hurt people?" "Yes," Sofia nodded, her expression resolved beyond her years. "Then we have to be brave. Like you were brave when we had nothing. Like great-great-grandpa Castellanos was brave when he hid the evidence." She took her mother's hand. "Being brave is more important than being safe, right?" Elena pulled her daughter close, tears stinging her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from you, Mommy." The trial preparation took 8 months. Catherine Blackwell fought every charge, hired the most expensive attorneys, and used every legal maneuver available. But the evidence was overwhelming. Thornton's investigation, combined with materials seized in the raids, documented decades of fraud, money laundering, and corruption. More disturbingly, FBI analysis of Catherine's communications revealed she'd been actively searching for the SS Meridian Star's location for years. She'd known her father and his associates had reasons to fear Castellanos' evidence. She'd spent millions trying to locate and salvage the ship herself before Elena bought it for $1. She was probably Thornton's original client, Agent Chen explained during a pre-trial briefing. "The interested parties who wanted to buy your salvage rights. When you refused to sell, when you found the evidence and turned it over, you didn't just destroy her father's freedom, you demolished her entire operation." Elena absorbed this, understanding finally why the threats had been so intense. She hadn't just stumbled into someone's secret. She'd systematically dismantled a criminal empire that had taken 2 generations to build. The trial began on a cold November morning. Elena sat in the courtroom beside Thornton, with Joe and Maria in the row behind her. Sofia was at school, protected by security, while her mother watched justice unfold. Catherine Blackwell sat at the defense table, her expensive suit and perfect posture projecting confidence. But Elena saw the tension in her shoulders, the tight grip on her attorney's arm. This woman had spent her life believing her wealth and connections made her untouchable. Now, she faced the same fate as her father: prison, disgrace, the collapse of everything she'd built. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Financial experts testified about money laundering. Former associates granted immunity. described Catherine's criminal operations, and in a dramatic moment that made national news, Thornton took the stand as a prosecution witness. He described his original employment by Catherine, the pressure to recover Castellanos's evidence at any cost, the implied threats against Elena and Sofia. His testimony was damning, made more powerful by his obvious remorse. "I've done terrible things in my career," Thornton said, his voice steady despite visible emotion. "Threatened innocent people, facilitated crimes. I tell myself I was just following orders, just doing my job. But that's a coward's excuse. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I did it anyway because the money was good." He looked directly at Catherine. "When Elena Rodriguez refused to be intimidated, when she chose justice over safety, she showed me what courage actually looks like. She had every reason to take the money and walk away. Instead, she did what was right, even knowing the danger it would bring." He turned to the jury. "I'm here today because she taught me that some things matter more than money or safety. Truth matters. Justice matters. And people like Catherine Blackwell need to face consequences for their crimes." The defense tried to discredit him, to paint him as a turncoat seeking revenge. But the financial evidence, the seized documents, and the testimony of other witnesses created an unassailable case. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Catherine Blackwell's composure finally shattered when the verdict was read. She stood, face pale, as the judge remanded her to custody, pending sentencing. As marshals led her away, she turned and locked eyes with Elena. The hatred in that gaze was chilling, a promise that even from prison, she would find a way to retaliate. But Elena didn't look away. She held Catherine's stare until the courtroom doors closed, refusing to show fear. She'd come too far, fought too hard, to be intimidated now. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Elena made a brief statement, thanking law enforcement and praising Thornton's courage in coming forward. She didn't mention the threats, the fear, the nights she'd lain awake worrying about Sofia's safety. Those were private struggles, not public theater. That evening, the core group gathered at Elena's home. Joe and Maria, Thornton, Agent Chen, and a few close Foundation staff. They'd become an unlikely family through shared danger and purpose. As they celebrated the verdict, Elena felt a weight lifting that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "It's really over," she said quietly to Joe. "Both generations convicted, the evidence secured. It's finally over." Joe squeezed her shoulder. "You did good, Elena. Better than good. You changed everything." But late that night, after everyone had left and Sofia was asleep, Elena stood at her window looking out at the city lights. She thought about the auction 3 years ago, standing in that warehouse with nothing but desperation and hope. Thought about raising her hand for a $1 bid while people laughed. That moment had defined everything that followed. Not the money, not the convictions, not even the justice, but the willingness to take a risk when every sensible person said it was crazy. The courage to believe something worthless might contain value. The refusal to accept that her circumstances defined her limits. She'd bought a sunken cruise ship for $1 and found $302 million in treasure and evidence. But the real treasure had been discovering her own strength, learning that she was brave enough to fight powerful enemies, smart enough to navigate complex moral choices, strong enough to protect her daughter while seeking justice. The SS Meridian Star was long gone, dismantled for scrap, but her legacy lived on. In the convictions, in the foundation helping families in crisis. In a little girl who'd learned that courage mattered more than safety. And in a woman who'd transformed from homeless and desperate to powerful and purposeful. Elena touched the window glass, feeling the cool surface against her palm. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and continue the foundation's work. She'd take Sofia to school, attend meetings, review grant applications, normal life. As normal as it could be when you were worth $311 million and had taken down 2 generations of criminals. But tonight, she let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and a broke single mother who everyone dismissed had proven that sometimes the craziest risks led to the most important victories. Somewhere, she hoped, Richard Castellanos was resting easier. His evidence had finally accomplished what he'd intended. His sacrifice hadn't been in vain, and the truth he'd died protecting had been powerful enough to span decades and transform lives. Elena smiled, thinking about that auction, that impossible moment when she'd changed everything with a single raised hand and $1. Some people would call it luck, others would call it fate, but Elena knew the truth. It was courage, pure, desperate, impossible courage, the kind that only came when you had everything to lose and nothing left to fear, the kind that changed the world, one crazy risk at a time, and she'd do it all again. Every dangerous dive, every federal investigation, every threat and fear and sleepless night, because some things were worth fighting for, and justice was at the top of that list. The city lights glittered before her, full of possibility and promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Elena Rodriguez stood in her safe home with her daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd made all the right choices, even the crazy ones, especially the crazy ones, because sometimes the worthless things contained the greatest treasures, and sometimes raising your hand when everyone else was laughing was the bravest thing you could possibly do. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.